Aloha, everybody, and welcome to the Jason Jones Show. I am your host, Jason Jones, coming from the beautiful hill country of Texas. And you thought I was coming from the south side of Chicago. I am wearing my proud south side of Chicago outfit. I'm wearing my Sox hat, my Pope Leo Sox shirt. And I'm wearing this today in honor of our guest. And I have to tell you, he's one of my favorite people, wrote one of my favorite books, and he's an expert on probably my favorite person. I don't know, one of my favorite people as well, Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Fulton Sheen. So we're going to have Dr. Peter Howard on today to talk about Bishop Fulton Sheen and the process for his beatification that's going forward. And this show, really, I hate to say it, I'm very selfish. It's more for me than for you. I'm so glad you're going to get to hear this interview, but I'm actually more happy that I get to do this interview to talk to someone I admire about the man that really, his writings were used by God to lead me to the Catholic Church, but not only me, but my wife as well. And I'll talk to Dr. Howard about how one of his miracles was, I think, my wife. He gave me my wife, and we'll talk about that on the show. This episode, as always, is being brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project. We stand in solidarity with the most vulnerable people in the world in the most challenging places and times. And what are some of those places? China, India, Taiwan, across Africa, but most notably Nigeria and the Nuba Mountains of Sudan. But we're also in Afghanistan, Pakistan, serving communities in Iran, and Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza. So as you can imagine, this war, it's been pretty intense at the Vulnerable People Office. And so for me, this interview is a break to talk about someone who is beautiful, his love of Jesus Christ and his love of the Blessed Mother will light up the rest of human history. He'll reflect the beauty of Christ for the rest of human history. And so with that, let's go to our website, savewestbankchristians.com, savewestbankchristians.com, and sign our letter calling on President Trump to demand that Israel stop with its illegal settlements that are displacing the oldest Christian community in the world, the Christians in Bethlehem. And if you can, click on the donate button up to the right. We are committed to giving every child in the West Bank and Gaza prosthetic limbs that are amputees. We've done our first 12 children in the past 2 weeks, and we've funded another 12 children for this week. And that's just a small drop in the bucket. But over the next 36 months, our commitment at VPP is to make sure that every child in Gaza and the West Bank receives a prosthetic limb. And my apostolate, and we'll get into this and you'll see how, was really influenced by two men, St. Maximilian Kolbe and Bishop Fulton Sheen. But now on with my interview with the great Dr. Peter Howard. Dr. Howard, welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
Thanks, Jason. This is my first time. I've been waiting for this for a long time. So many reschedules. I'm just not on the A list, so I get that.
Whoa. Is this your first time on my show?
We're here. I've been waiting for this moment. I've never been on your show.
That's embarrassing because when I first started
we tried.
Okay,
so
listen, when I first started my
like
show,
it's been ignored. We tried, and you're usually filming somewhere in the world, some undisclosed location, and I get a text like, "Can't say anything." Ciao or
I'm at the Bellagio Hotel in the penthouse suite.
I'm in Japan with one of my children, and
no, well,
so it's okay. It's good time. This is always the good timing, is when God wants it.
Well, let me tell you how embarrassing this is. When I first started the show, because I was so moved by your book, I had like 20 names of people that I wanted to interview, and you were on that first list of 20 names. And my podcast, as the audience will tell you, has suffered greatly over the past couple of years, because the work has been just a bit overwhelming at the Vulnerable People Project. And so we haven't done shows as regularly as we would hoped. Half the time, or maybe most of the time, we're just covering directly the work of the Vulnerable People Project, which isn't the goal of the show. I mean, the goal of the show was for me to kind of have a fun place to do interviews like this. So this is something that is exciting. But before we begin, I want to tell you how Fulton Sheen is merely one of the greatest miracles for Bishop Fulton Sheen, maybe of any saint of all time, is this miracle I'm about to tell you, Dr. Peter Howard. On my first date with my wife, she was this irreligious liberal, and I was on my way to the Catholic Church. And so I gave her Peter Kreeft's The Journey. And I said to her, because I'm charming, this book was written for eighth graders, but you're a liberal with a college degree, so it's probably a little over your head. But here you go. Okay, that's what I said because I'm so charming. And well, that book she didn't even read it. She wasn't interested. On our second date, I gave her Piece of Soul by Fulton Sheen, and that's a whole other story how I came across Piece of Soul. And she read it, she said, in one setting, and now one sitting. And I had been going to mass, even though I wasn't Catholic. I was being catechized by a priest in Virginia. I was living in Hawaii. I'd go to daily mass with my Magnificat. Of course, I couldn't receive communion, but I would read along and pray. And after that first day of reading Piece of Soul, she asked me if she, and we were just kind of even dating, just getting to know each other. She said, "Can I join you at mass?" And so my girlfriend and I, now my wife, we would go to mass at St. Augustine Church on Waikiki Beach. I wish I could go back to those days. And we would sit there with our Magnificats and pray the mass, although we couldn't receive communion. And so I really think Bishop Fulton Sheen brought me my wife. And if you know my wife, so the fact that she married me is a miracle of miracles, maybe the greatest miracle in history of the universe. And I wish that maybe that should be for his canonization. So Fulton Sheen to me means the world. Not only that, of course, I'm being silly, but he really helped form me as a Catholic and catechized me. I had I had this huge vinyl DVD set. I believe it was 52 DVDs. It was I'm sorry, not DVDs, CDs. It was 24 hours of broadcasts on the sacraments and on the theological virtues, on the cardinal virtues, the marks of the church, and just a sort of like a compendium or a catechism of the Catholic faith. And so personally, I'm so grateful that this priest that died when I was in third grade came to me in my late 20s and really helped catechize me in the faith.
Wow.
So that's that. Now tell us, but with that being said, tell us, who is Fulton Sheen? Who is he? I think everyone should know him. He's, but I guess if you're over 60, you probably know him. And if you watch EWTN, you know him, or you subscribe to, you get the TAN catalog in the mail, you know him. But maybe most people today probably don't know who Fulton Sheen is, although there was a time in America, he was probably one of the most celebrated and well-known Americans, yeah?
Yeah, he was the greatest Catholic in 20th century America, and that's not just within, like, saying that within the Catholic Church. This is a man who accomplished really the impossible. And I love one of his sayings. He says, "Believe the impossible, and you will do the incredible." You see it in his own life. This obscure guy, I mean, well, not that point, not later on, but out of the obscurity, you could say, of the country land just north of Peoria, Illinois, in El Paso, Texas, comes this extraordinary figure that literally has impacted the entire world. A man who, in his prime, when he was on his television show in the 1950s, he reached 30 million people a week, and 60% of his audience were non-Catholic. And then within that demographic, the higher percentage were Jews. So it'd be interesting to today, like what he would say to them. Get Fulton Sheen and Ben Shapiro together, or Mark Levin. Anyway, um, just an extraordinary man who had the pulse of the world and was given to the church and the world at the most critical time. There's a lot of times where I kind of lament, I wish he were alive today because we have such a vacuum in leadership, and he really fulfilled that. But like he said of St. Thomas Aquinas, when you go back to the 13th century, he said that his period in history at that time was just accidental. He says, if need means actuality, then St. Thomas was more actual in the 20th century than he was in the 13th century. I'd have to say the exact same thing of Fulton Sheen. And
Mm.
I see the wisdom too why we don't have him, because if you look at his history, he was born in 1895, he died in 1979, right after John Paul II became Pope. And if you ever do a comparison side by side between John Paul II and I call him Saint John Paul the Great, and Fulton Sheen, they're identical. Like their formation, their passions, their acting, their
Yeah.
I mean everything. They were philosophers first, then they were theologians, and they were mystics. And they both and the common thread too was they had a great insight and a passion for what the world needed most, and that was to rediscover the meaning of what it means to be human. For sure, for Fulton Sheen, this was the number one crisis that all of the political and economic problems of the 20th century all boiled down to. When we talk about Marxism and communism, he says it all comes down to a theological question: is what does it mean to be man? And so, anyway, he breaks it down. He's like, there's three powers that we're up against. Um, where man is a tool of the state is the first one. Totalitarianism. Two, man is just an animal, which was really sparked off by Charles Darwin. Um, Anyway, there's some fascinating points on this I'd like to, if we ever have time to go off into. But and then third is whether man is made in the image and likeness of God. This is the primary question today. That's at the heart of everything that isn't being talked enough about. It's at the very heart of what you do, which is why this was always a big part of Fulton Sheen. He was for almost 20 years. He ran the Mission Society. Actually, no, it wasn't 20 years. It was 50. Yeah, it was 18 years. He ran he was a director, the national director for the Pontifical Society for the Missions, and that brought him all around the world. And his insights, just as far as um, what you would easily understand with the Vulnerable People Project, is just how the commonality that we all share that brings a natural solidarity that Satan wants, and his number one plan, uh, you can say his modus operandi is to divide that. And so we hate each other. And what brings people together more than anything is actually meeting somebody and realize you prick them with a pin, they're going to jump as high as you do. They're going to eat things when you're hungry. It's like, so anyway, he was such an extraordinary man. And his great success on television was doing something as simple as introducing to America, um, why that the Christian philosophy of life is the only answer to the world's problems. And nobody knew at that time how deep he was going to for all of his research for his programs. Because he prepared 30 hours for every 30 minutes. And then he would take his notes and then he would write them out in French and Italian. And then he'd give it to people who spoke the languages and say, "What do you think of this?" And they give him feedback. Because he said when you put it in a different language, you have to reduce what you're trying to say to a ninth grade level. They give it back to him. He'd rework it. That's his final thing. And then he'd memorize it. And then if you go on YouTube and you watch him today, that's after 30 hours of writing, praying. And also that, like, I'm at my desk right now. I'm looking at, I have a large screen in front of me. For Sheen, he had his desk positioned in his private apartment in Manhattan so he could see our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. So every single thing that he prepared was in front of our Lord. And that's why he got so many great insights. So this was a man who, um, he was a prophet for our times. And we can go off on all of these things because what's happening right now in America and throughout the world, because, he straddled both of those things. He was an American. He loved America, but the last things that he focused on before he died that never were televised was the question. It was a series was called "What Now, America." So it's good that we talk about that. Um, but he saw where we are then 80 years ago, and in light of everything that's being tried, as we see the literally the cycle of which seems to be very true, that the average life of a democracy is about 200 to 250 years. Here we are, and we're on a thread. It doesn't take a PhD to figure this stuff out. Um, and then now as we're talking, war's been launched. with even with Iran, and this is going to be a big deal. And so you know, I look to Fulton Sheen as a man who God gave the answers. I always saw him as one of my favorite American figures, which was his, is General Douglas MacArthur. The way he viewed the world, the way he prepared for battle. I mean, General MacArthur was a man who did exactly what Sheen did. He spent an hour a day, every single day in prayer, and he wasn't Catholic. He said, I can never prepare for battle unless I spend at least an hour a day in prayer and meditation. Um, but Sheen is that figure that we need. There's so much confusion. There's like everybody's being divided, taking this camp, that camp. And my last comment on this is, I think about like why Sheen, why now his beatification is now back, not just on the radar. It's going to happen. It should happen this year. Is because one of the central quotes I always think about. He says that he says right is right if nobody's right. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody is wrong. He says, and believe me, what we need now is a church and an authority that's right, not right when the world is right, but one that is right when the world is wrong. And I find that he's like my posts, my lamp posts that takes me to all the different levels of where I can be so formed to think on my own. And then I can also be consistent in thinking in accordance with the wisdom of the church. I think that's why God gave us Sheen then, and why providentially, on the 250th anniversary of our country, and I say this very seriously, we could be done. And in a certain sense, I say we are done. There's no going back. And Sheen said it too. He didn't say that. He said about the whole world. He said the old wells have run dry. The old world is dead. And he was talking about World War II. And he says, when this war's over, we don't want to go back to the world that we want. Because everybody says, "Oh, we want to save what we have. How do we save and move on?" He's like, "We don't want it because that was the world that brought us a Hitler."
Yeah.
Today, we could just fill that line in with, I mean, endless figures, and so we're at a new foundation of these lands. And I believe firmly, Fulton Sheen is the man that we need to be looking for, and two, because God gave him the wisdom. What St. Thomas Aquinas was in the 13th century, helping us to understand reality and theology. Sheen takes that as just one component to understanding what the modern world is thinking and knowing how to respond to its problems.
I want to go back to the young Fulton Sheen. So he was born in 1895, which means he grew up around Civil War veterans and veterans of the Indian Wars. It had been almost a century before the last major European war, the Napoleonic Wars, and he's a part of that generation that's known as the Lost Generation. So Fulton Sheen comes out of the Lost Generation. I think he was an altar boy at the same time Stalin was an altar boy. He was in France at the same time as a student that Mark Twain was, and all of these expat authors were bouncing around Paris. And you look at someone like an Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and there had to be an inciting incident. He had to be bearing the weight of the trauma of that generation, the wars, the rise of totalitarianism. But I've never been able to get a real glimpse of his own psychology or how it affected him. And he tells this story. Every story I'm going to tell you, you know better than me. But the story of two young altar boys that spilled the Eucharist. One young altar boy, I believe, was a Russian Orthodox or altar boy, and he spilled the blood of Christ, and the bishop beat him for his troubles. And another young altar boy spilled the Eucharist, and a sheepish young boy went back into the sacristy, and this priest looked at him and said, "You're going to make a great priest one day." And that one was Bishop Fulton Sheen, and the young altar boy that was beat was Joseph Stalin. So he comes from this very consequential generation that spun off into so many generations. We saw the rise of existentialism and atheism and the occult and theosophy and nihilism. But then here is this priest from the heartland of America that grew up, that his cohorts went off to World War I. He is of this lost generation. Can you share with us how history impacted him personally. He always seemed so joyful. I say he's your Italian uncle who's the life of your Irish uncle who's the life of every party. And you can't wait till, Uncle Fulton shows up. But I have to imagine with his seriousness, with the diligence in which he studied, with how thoughtful he was in measuring every word which he shared publicly, his commitment to foreign missions, that this is the result of profound personal wounds.
Yeah, that's a really good question. He never talked about his upbringing too much. When you read his autobiography, I mean, you have the definitive biography of him, America's Bishop, and then you have his Treasure in Clay. And he focuses on he does mention the story about when he was an altar boy. That was a very prophetic moment in his life. Um, but just to back up even before then, he talked about where he got his ethic of hard work, which was a staple of understanding Fulton Sheen. I mean, if you he carried this all throughout his life, especially when he was young. But he worked on the farm and he hated it. He said he killed so many chickens. He said he never liked chicken after that. He'd never eat it. Um, but he's like, thanks be to God because I learned the ethic of hard work. His parents then send him to school in Peoria, and he had a natural aptitude for the academic, intellectual life. He did really well, and there's not much. He went to high school. He's a valedictorian. It was a small world in which he lived. And a staple of his family, though, was he he mentioned they prayed the rosary every night. Of all the things that he mentioned that one particular thing. He says that really carried out all throughout his life, and he talked about how when he was baptized, because his original name actually wasn't Fulton, it was Peter. It's Peter Sheen.
Oh.
Um, so I take pride in that. Um, and his mother laid him on the altar and consecrated him to the Blessed Virgin Mary. This was something that was pretty common in those days of tradition right after the baptism. But this was something that meant a lot to him because later on he talked about when he consecrated himself more intentionally. Um, and then his motto as a bishop was taken from that. Anyway, he lived a very insulated world. Where things began to change was he knew from a young age he was called to be a priest. So it's one of those things you're kind of jealous about. You meet few people like that. I've always known. The bishop that when he went to mass as an altar boy and he dropped the cruet that had the wine and the water, and he said there's no decibels as loud as listening to a glass cruet crashing on a marble floor. And like you were saying in the story, Bishop Spalding at that time, who was in Peoria, after mass, didn't even mention it. He just looked at Sheen and he said, asked him a couple of questions. Oh, where are you going to school? He said, I'm going to go to Bishop Spalding. And then he says, have you ever heard of the University of Louvain? He says, no. He says, well, one day you're going to go there and you are going to be just like me. Can you imagine getting that from a bishop? And he just kind of forgot about that. I'm not going to fast forward too much because he does end up going there. But a decisive moment came to him that could have changed everything. This was when he was after high school. He went to minor seminary, and he got close to a priest, Father Bergen, a priest that I think had, well, perhaps the greatest influence on him that shaped him. One is that Sheen was on the debate team. This was another thing that kind of brought him into battling the errors of things. He just really loved it. But the first time he was on the team, Father Bergen pulled him aside and said, "You're the worst debater speaker I've ever heard." And it just and you can imagine it mortified Sheen. And he didn't tell him why. So anyway, long story short, Sheen just mulled it over, and then he came banging on his door later on, and he says, "I figured it out." He said, "Well, what is it?" He says, "I just need to be myself. I need to be natural, not trying to be something like I'm not." And he said, "That's it." So, and then that changed everything from there. Another moment, though, was Sheen at this time, he went through this national test, and if you won it, then they awarded just a few scholarships that would pay for all your education, even through your PhD. And he won the award, and he ran over to Father Bergen. He's playing tennis, and he stops. He comes over to Fulton Sheen, and he says, "Father, I got it. Like, basically, like, look what God's done. This is absolutely incredible." And he looked Sheen in the eyes, and he says, "Do you believe in God?" And Sheen said, "Yeah, of course I do." No, he says, "Really? Practically speaking, do you believe in God?" Sheen says, "At that point, I wasn't so sure." He said, "Tear it up." And yeah, just like they can imagine Sheen's like, "What?" Like, "Father, nothing's been any more clear to me than accomplishing this." He says, "No, you're called to be a priest. Tear it up." He's like, "Father, look, I won this. Let me just get all these things done and over with. I can come back to the seminary later." I said, "No, do not wait. If you do, you don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen." He says, "Tear it up and go now." And Sheen did. He tore it up, and he ended up going to seminary, and that's where things began to change. He had a mystical experience in the seminary. So before I get into that, his younger years were just very simple, but very prophetic moments that came in there. In the seminary, he talked about a moment that shaped him, where he had during evening prayer, vespers with everyone, the liturgy of the hours, where he said he had this illumination, where he had absolute certitude of every single thing, of every line in the creed for his faith. And he said that changed his whole disposition. And it wasn't until after he was ordained a priest where he went to Catholic University and things began to change a little bit. And then he realized he just was not getting what he felt. Like, his passion was, they said, "I want to know what the modern world is thinking." He knew enough of the history. He, like you were saying too, like, he never talked about it necessarily as a young man, what that meant, but he he saw all the brokenness. He saw where all these things, he's like, "Somebody has to answer this." And God was telling him, "You are." And he knew that. Like, and he just couldn't find where it was going to be, where that formation was going to come from. Even at Catholic U, he talked to a priest friend after he got his degrees there, and he was ordained a priest and went to Catholic U. He's like, "You're not going to find it here. Go to Louvain. There's this new institute of philosophy there." He's like, "Okay." Got permission. He said, as soon as he stepped foot on the campus, he went back in time to the moment when Bishop Spalding said, "You're going to go to Louvain and you're going to be like me." This is where things really began to do, because this Institute of Philosophy was tailored uniquely to the question that she wanted answered. What is the world thinking? Philosophically, in the natural sciences, everything that was the latest. He wanted to know what it was and dissect it, and then using the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas to then answer all the errors. And this was dedicated to that. Cardinal Mercier was commissioned by Pope Leo XIII to start this thing. So anyway, this was everything to him. By the time he got to the end, he wrote a doctorate, and then he had a super doctorate degree. Nobody had
How
ever
old
even.
was he when he was writing? What year is this? Because he was so prolific, but
Yeah.
he really we can get into, like, sort of how he was sidetracked a bit for a while, but it was all part of God's plan. But I mean, this was happening pretty fast. Right now, he's in his early 20s, mid 20s.
Yeah, he was ordained a priest in 1919.
Okay,
So he was
26.
1895. So what is that? 24 years old. Is
Okay,
that
24.
right? And then he spent a year or two, I forget how many, at Catholic University, and got like his master's kind of level degree there, and he just wasn't satisfied. And then he went to Louvain, and he was there for about 3 years, and then he spent his summers in England, in London, and now that's why he was always doing pastoral work as well. So yeah, so he's in his mid to second, mid late 20s, by the time he finishes all of that.
And
And then
he started publishing very young too, right? So when did he publish his first book?
Oh gosh, the first book was what his dissertation was. It was,
Okay.
which is very important to know. It's right behind me. It's, because it's really the blueprint for everything that he did afterward. Sort of like a pope when they when they write their first encyclical, it tells them where they wanna go, like John
Yeah.
Paul II, redeemer of man.
I
Well,
write
for
books for
this,
myself. So I know what I'm doing with my life.
yeah, and so it was God and intelligence, and the whole thing was to trace the history, especially through modern philosophy, of the divorce between the two that we see um, in the 17th and 18th centuries, especially, and then how it that whole disconnect in the French Revolution was to sever all of that, and then the moral relativism comes in. But the whole point is, it's like because this is what today is. We've completely the effort to divorce God from intelligence has resulted in man becoming God, in the complete erasing of the image of God in man. Instead, man makes God in his image.
I
Um,
really hope that Pope Leo in his encyclical on AI draws on this work.
I hope so. I don't know many people who have it, but well, this is one of the things that I want to be working on as we move forward, because it's one of those things where he becomes more relevant every single day. And yet things are moving so fast. It's like we don't have time. So it's like, Lord, please provide what you know so you can
Can
dive
we
in.
can we go I wanna go to this kinda rocky road. Like, so I think that Fulton Sheen is more relevant every day. He's the most relevant Catholic influencer alive today. And then you compare him to someone like Bishop Barron. I don't know how you put it, but and I wanna be charitable to Bishop Barron, but I am often frustrated by him because Bishop Barron with, um, Ben Shapiro was different than what Fulton Sheen with Ben Shapiro would have been like. If Fulton Sheen was asked the question that Ben Shapiro asked Bishop Barron, he would have gotten a Catholic answer. Um, Now to be charitable to Bishop Barron, I think in the wake of the scandal, the abuse crisis, there may be sort of this timidity among bishops and public celebrity priests like Bishop Barron, that they're really afraid to be too confrontational with the culture. And I don't know how you put it earlier, but Monsignor Sheen, in the months after the dropping of the atomic bomb, gave a lecture at Catholic University condemning the United States. He was never afraid to say the hard thing when it was hard, and yet he did it in a way that was well received, that people trusted his motives, they respected him, they knew it was thoughtful. And he actually always communicated in a way that was more colloquial, while at the same time had a depth and a profundity. And I find with Bishop Barron, he takes very simple things and makes them very complex. And Bishop Fulton Sheen would take very complex thoughts and ideas and he would make it simple. You can listen to Fulton Sheen's talks and, all of us, you can be an illiterate, uh, um, day laborer and who has not had the blessings of education, and you can listen to a Fulton Sheen talk on the sacraments or on the Trinity, and you can really be enriched. Where you look at some of these other thinkers today, like Bishop Barron, he'll take something very simple and try to make it almost obscure. Do you want to address that in any way?
Well, I think the starting point for Fulton Sheen was anthropological, and I use that word because that's the word he used. He talked about that there were three phases of evangelization. One was the direct approach, which is what he did on radio. This was the Catholic doctrine, and it was, I think, some of his most powerful things were during those years on radio in the 30s, 40s. But then he moved into television. He started where the approach became different. He said, if you really want to reach people, you have to start with a common point that everyone can grasp. So he would start with, talking about airplanes or something like that, and then he'd end talking about angels and how they connect to each other. And that was the way he evangelized people too. He talked about one, just as a little parentheses. He went to somebody's house, and um, the son of the parents was just belligerent toward him, like, get this priest out of here. You like threw a wrench at him. And then Sheen, most of us probably would leave and be like, I'm out of here. Like, I don't want to deal with this. Sheen basically, I think he walked out and then he came back in and he said, and I don't know what the model would be like, is that a Ford such and such you're working on? Because, such and such carburetor, this and this. And the guy sat there like, who is this guy? All of a sudden, he just cracked right through that. And he was now able to engage them. And he said that, look, this is, that was that common approach. He said, but what's coming in the future is hard to talk to people. He says, unless you understand that the starting point is going to be not from the order of the cosmos, which is how the ancients always came and saw God. Yeah, and he said it's gonna come from the disorder from within, man's brokenness, and he
Yeah.
says, and we're gonna use all the good advances, and insights of psychology and the modern sciences as a springboard to divine truths. Because, he talked about a woman, this is a great example, she was going through instruction, and she got to the one of the, talks on confession, and she freaked out. She says, I'm done with the Catholic Church. And he's like, okay. He talks to her secretary. He says, have her listen to one more and then we'll see where it goes. She listens to another one. She's like, that's it. Get me out of here. She's like literally freaking out. And he shows up and he says, as Sheen would do, my dear woman, your reaction is in absolutely no proportion to what you've just heard. And then this is a saint. He's like, have you had an abortion? And you probably know the story. And she just dropped her head and she said, yes. And he said that was it. Because Sheen was like, when he was talking about when there's controversies about things, and this is hard for the modern era because we're so combative, especially in a very impersonal world, on our texting, X's, comments, all that kind of stuff. Um, he says, never pay attention to what people say. Why do they say it? And he says, if you do that, then he's like, people don't care who are so broken, they're not really interested. They actually have an aversion to a certain degree of the things that will save them, like the Eucharist and all that. He says they have to first know that that God loves them in the moment and he doesn't want to leave them there. And there is a way out. And once they do that, he says, then the graces come in, then they want the whole meal. They want everything. So, I think that this is a central point with with how Sheen approached people,
Can I
like,
go back to
especially
like
when they
how he loved?
disagreed, communists, you name it.
I loved his like always his conversations on the confessions that he heard. Like one of my favorite was the woman, the starlet, who's passed out drunk on his doorsteps, and she's like, "Well, I'm not going to hear your don't you you've got to promise me you won't ask to hear my confession." And he asked her to meet him in the church, and he shoves her in the confessional. He's like, "I didn't ask, I told you." Um, but this is going to be a strange comparison, and I shared this with your wife when she was interviewing me on a book that she's doing on Fulton Sheen. Someone that I compare him to is Joe Rogan. No, you got to follow me on this. One of the things I love about Joe Rogan, now he does interviews, and Fulton Sheen didn't, but in his interviews, he just seems to be in awe of everyone he's interviewing. You think everyone Joe Rogan is interviewing is like his biggest hero, and he's not affecting this. He really is mesmerized about it by his guests. And one of the things that to me is most charming about Bishop Fulton Sheen is when he tells his stories. It could be of a homeless man or a starlet, an investment banker or a general. He was talking about his time in Paris, and a gentleman was having an affair, and he asked Fulton Sheen, I'm sure you know the story. He'd asked Fulton Sheen's help to break off the affair, but at the end of the day, he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't break the affair. That story made me wonder if Graham Greene had heard it, because in his powerful novel, The End of an Affair, the protagonist prays to God, I know I have to choose him or you. I want to choose you, but I will choose him. And Fulton Sheen talked about how sorrowful it was that this man had all this grace presented to him, but at the end turned his back on God. But with that story, and I think all the stories represent, here is this man who become famous quite young. I guess in his early 30s, his radio show began to take off, or mid 30s. And it was so he became quite famous. He became a quote unquote man of the world, traveling to London and to Paris. But he would tell all of these stories as if it was the only story he had in his pocket, as if it was one time this one thing happened and he's thought about it so much. But he was an admirer and a lover of human beings. And that's why he was a great evangelist that led so many people to God because he loved them.
As you were talking, it made me think of when he talked about Mary Magdalene and her conversion, and in front of apostles and the Pharisees, and how they're like, do you know what kind of woman this is? And he's talking about how this is how the world sees people. They see people with tags on them, and Jesus doesn't at all. And that's why every single soul is somebody that Jesus wants to save. And this is critical for Sheen. If you don't understand this point, you'll never understand why he's really important and his real role, because this is what we need now more than ever. Two things. He says, there's nothing more important than the salvation of a soul. He said, the second thing, unless souls are saved, nothing is saved. The world will never have peace until it first has soul peace. And he talks about these two things. He says there's a harsh barbarism from without, and there's a soft barbarism from within. The harsh ones from without, they usually are dealt with like through the military, something like that. But the interior, the soft barbarism is what we often ignore. And I mean, the sacrifices that he made. This is a huge thing. People don't realize this about him because they focus on his extraordinary abilities to reach souls, which he attributes to his daily holy hour. But is the fact that he was always a man of great sacrifice. You had mentioned his encounters with the poor. Um, he had an FBI file on him, like everybody did at those times, and he was actually knew Hoover, who saved him at one point because Sheen had a communist who was following him around and then asked Sheen to be his personal like companion and all of his things. And Sheen's like, I'm going to run him by. And if they found out he's like one of the huge KGB spies. Um, but in this file, though, I mean, just imagine being the guy who's following him around everywhere. The stories of he'd leave, Sheen he had nice things. He
Now,
made a
did you
lot of
have
money.
access? Did you do a FOIA request on Bishop Fulton Sheen's FBI file?
I never even thought of that.
That would be a book.
I've never even
Oh,
thought of
that's
that.
your
I'm gonna have
next
to jump on
book.
it before you
You
do
better
it.
give me a thank you in the acknowledgments, okay?
I can't even imagine how big it would be. But I mean, some of the things that came out of that were, he'd leave. They see him leave his Manhattan apartment, and he'd go to work, and he'd have like a nice, I don't know. When I was a kid, like London fog or whatever was like a big jacket, real nice. And he'd return. By the time he got back, he wouldn't have it. It'd be cold outside because he gave it to somebody. People don't realize, if you put in how much money he made on his television series, Life is Worth Living, in today's money, it would be about a little over $100 million. Every single penny that he made from that television series went to the poor and the missions. Every penny. He didn't keep one of that. Now, he survived, you can say, survived, but he had his books and other things. But that one thing where he really made you could say the fortune, all of it went there. And when he'd ask for a dime, people who watched him, millions of people, like they would literally have gigantic bags arriving at uh, the um the headquarters for the missions of dimes. And so he was, people don't know that about him, and this is what kept him grounded. He said this was his great struggle, was he loved being in those circles. I just imagine he naturally was within them. He was with the elite, the Hollywood actors. Um, and that's where he was. And whenever somebody of a high stature was,
Did he admit so he said that was a challenge, that he liked being in those circles?
yeah, he said that was a like kind of like St. Paul's thorn. We kind of speculate, maybe something of concupiscence or whatever, or lust or
Yeah.
whatever that was. Sheen, he loved the limelight. He loved
Mhm.
being in it. And now, one might say, "Well, what's the harm in that?" You could, if you've been even partially in it, you had a breakthrough in your life, like the temptations at that point too. It's like it kind of magnifies what kind of person you are, like when you come upon wealth.
I'd say
If
there's
you're
no harm in it if you acknowledge that it's a temptation. The fact that
Yeah, oh, yeah, but
the
but it's
harm
a
would
big
be
one.
if he didn't recognize that this was a challenge for him, that he rationalized it and said, "I'm doing this because if I convert those on the top of the mountain, those in the valley can see." Um, you know, which is true. And by the way, that's a direct quote from Saint Jose Maria Escrivá in the way. But there's nothing wrong with that. And there's truth to that. At the Vulnerable People Project, most of my time is spent building relationships with people in positions of influence to leverage in the service of the vulnerable. That's really most of what we do. Um, and for me, it's a challenge. That's a challenge. I actually like being in the field with the people that we serve the most. In fact, but anyway, I digress. But it's a beautiful thing that Fulton Sheen acknowledged that that was a challenge.
Yeah, well, he said he gives a lot of examples where he learned it the hard way too. When I'm sure you know the story when he visited the leper colony,
Yo, can you
and
tell that story? That's such a beautiful story.
yeah, I forget what maybe like Papua New Guinea or someplace like that, or but he went out to this place and it was a leper colony, and because he traveled, I guess he traveled the world, especially like Africa and the East. And in this particular place, he had a bunch of people he was giving um, crucifixes to. And when he got near the very end, a man put out his hand to receive it. And he said it was just one of the foulest things you could imagine of like the decay of a human body part. And he said when he got to him, he dropped it into his hand. And he said the moment he let go of that, he's like, at that moment, there were 101 lepers in that colony. And he had such instant remorse because he knew what he had done. I mean, on a natural level, someone might say, "Well, how can you blame him?" No, this was a man who loved humanity. He loved God. But in that moment, we get tested, but then he took his hand and then he grabbed it and he kissed it, very much like a Saint Francis of Assisi moment when he did it with the leper. So Sheen had God always had instances in his life to kind of keep him at check. He had fragile health on Marian solemnities and feast days. He said it was often when he was given the worst ailments or a heart problem. God, he's like when you love the Lord a lot, He unites you to Him in His cross and in His suffering. And he said that's one of the greatest graces because, in the end, He's going to ask you, "Where are your scars?" He quotes this one poet, Shinito, I think is his name, and he says, "Show me your hands." You know,
Mm.
show me your feet. Are they worn out from walking? Bringing the good news to others, or feeding the poor. He goes through all of these different things, and you know that's why Jesus, like when he appears, he still has his scars. It's really interesting. So he, you'll never understand Sheen. Um, as a saint that he is, unless you really understand that what he called his priest victimhood.
He
Not
wrote a
just he
book
was
with
a
that
priest.
title. Yeah, I think there was a book with that title, or maybe it was a lecture series.
Yeah,
Priest
well,
and
he brought it up
Victim.
a lot in his latter years. He talked about it in his books on the priesthood itself. Priest was not his own, and then he redid it in the 70s, those mysterious priests. But the very first time I ever got that I encountered Sheen was in the late 90s. And after my collegiate years, my undergrad years, and I went on a retreat right around this time. It was during Lent, and as my sister gave me this set, and I was like, I was in Dallas at that time, and I'd already gone to Franciscan University.
What set was
Never
it? You never heard of him at Franciscan?
I heard his name, like, once in a blue moon. Nobody ever referenced him. It'd be like hearing, like, out of nowhere, like, John Henry Newman, like, he comes up once in a while,
Yeah.
and you're like, "Oh, yeah," and I kinda thought, "Oh," I wasn't like, is he British?" Or I didn't know. He was never used as a source. He was never quoted in anything that I was in any of my classes, and then,
And his
um
credentials outpaced those that were allowed to, but because he was also such a great he was I mean, an intellectual, but he was also a great popular communicator, and I think it was hard for people to bridge that gap and understand that, so I could see students not knowing that this is a man they should be researching and citing in their works.
You're right, and that was the challenge too going into my doctorate, because my doctorate, the book that you have is based off of it, and it was, written in that same spirit. Was he was seen as a populist, for a theologian. And, you know, the early chapters you're showing, I mean, there's probably no man more credentialed to do what he did than Sheen, who went to Rome and he read every single thing and studied everything that St. Thomas Aquinas ever wrote in Latin. Like he people said he thought in Latin. Um, but he said, for him it was all about everything that he studied was so that as long as it's used for the salvation of souls, that was his mission. So, and I
And
think
Rene
that's
Girard
why he's so
writes about the
important.
victim, that to be in solidarity with the victim is to be the victim. And so in persona Christi, what is a priest but a victim? He's a victim.
Yeah, and he said this was one of the great tragedies after the Second Vatican Council was the the understanding of the priesthood began to change. And he said it wasn't just a council. I mean, things existed beforehand. And he said, but this is something that has to be resurrected because he says that's the problem. We're just priests. We're just offerers. He introduced a priesthood completely different from the entire Old Testament, where he was both the one who offered and was who was offering up, and he was the one that was offered. Behold the Lamb of God. The millennial old question that rang through the Old Testament, and then John the Baptist sees Jesus and says, "Behold the Lamb of God." Like it's now answered. And so anyway, this radically changed me, and I was discerning my vocation in life, and that really had me look more seriously at the priesthood. I knew during that retreat that no matter what God was leading me to, I said, this is absolutely revolutionary and it's going to change everything in my life. I didn't know in what way, because I also knew, like, I'm not a priest, obviously now I'm married. Um, it was, well, we're baptized into the priesthood, as Jesus, three offices: priest, prophet, and king. And it immediately went to me was, it's the same priesthood that we all have in our baptisms, ordained priests, and those of us who are, we all have the same baptism. We have to rediscover that. And when we do that, then everything begins to make sense that Our Lady's been saying in Fatima, from Lord and onward: penance, 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 make sacrifices for sinners. Um, it's like, that's a participation in our priest victimhood. And I think this is still a crisis today. But I also believe it's a turning point for today, and why Sheen is so important is because he's going to help um, bring a rebirth in these things for our priests and for the lady, because in the end, these are the things that have been asked of us by Our Lady, and now they make sense if you look at it through this lens. So,
Well,
Sheen he was a prophet.
Well, I don't want to. I have to do a series of shows. I think maybe we should do a big series separate from this, with you. But what I want to do right now is, if you can share with us, for those who are watching, listening, because they know who Fulton Sheen is, and they're really excited about the beatification process. Can you tell us, are we there? Is this happening? And I know that Pope Leo is controversial, is tragically all popes have been controversial in my lifetime to some degree or another. Um, but being from the south side of Chicago, I'm repping Pope Leo today. He's pushing the beatification forward, we're told. So can you share with us what's going on? I
Yeah.
know everyone seems very excited. Is this something we're going to see, and when can we expect to see it? Because I
Mhm.
need to reserve some hotel rooms in Rome before they skyrocket in
Well,
price.
you won't have to go to Rome for this. So yeah. Um, well, at the latter part of January, was it Yeah, very end of January. Um, there was an article that came out in the Pillar magazine that somebody had information that was saying that the announcement of Fulton Sheen's beatification mass to be rescheduled for 2026 was imminent. And so everybody kind of held their breath a little bit because it was unconfirmed. The Diocese of Peoria was tight-lipped about it. And then in early February, it was confirmed. The Diocese of Peoria did come out and say Rome gave us the green light to reschedule it. And I kind of chuckled a little bit just because this is something I'm intimately involved with behind the scenes, as actually it's been a battle. Um, and I'd like to think that the movement that we've had, something that you've participated in when we've had our rallies and just outside of Southside Chicago with Father Loya.
That was awesome.
Um, he shared a message with my wife Chantal when she was going back and forth with him recently. He said, "I think we
No,
need to
Father
get
Goya
together."
baptized my sister.
Yeah, yeah, he's such an amazing man, and he stood out when nobody else did in the Roman side to do this, and this was outside the jurisdiction of the Diocese of Peoria. A Anyway, the movement that we started, I personally believe had a big part in this. I'm not saying me, the movement itself.
No, let
You
me just
represent.
tell you, I have watched you and your wife with discipline and for fortitude. Now, I think I've known you almost a decade and a half or so. I mean, it seems like it's been quite a while. I've watched you with discipline and fortitude not get drifted this way or drifted that way, but you've really remained focused. And I'm grateful because, you know, we the United States, the world, because of the disorder in our souls, the reason why Peace of Soul resonated with me and why I gave it to my wife on our first or second date and why it resonated with her is because we had chaos and disorder inside of us. And so I think it's such a grace that this is happening and it'll be such a blessing to the church universally, but especially in the United States. Thank you.
Yeah, it will be, and this is where you have to surrender to God's wisdom behind it because, this has been a battle for 6 years, in the last 3 more intensely, which is why we started the movement, was because it was literally just almost iced on a shelf, and we kept hearing this excuse for at that time, like 3 or 4 years. We had to wait for this Attorney General report coming out of New York that was investigating all the dioceses, including Rochester, to verify what Rome already knew. And then eventually Peoria admitting it was always irrelevant, but they still needed it. So the movement, as I would go deeper into it, was there are forces at work here outside of just the obvious because Rome has never had a problem with this. And I personally went to Rome in September for the canonizations of Carlo Acutis and Pior Giorgio Frassati. I took my son Beckett, had our big moment together, and it was an opportunity to present the petition that we've been building out for years. And so I was literally on the jet emailing the dicastery for saints saying, "Hey, I'm going to be there. Can I personally deliver this? I'd rather not give it to a porter who then gives it over." I mean, that would still be a nice symbolic thing. But anyway, I got a response. Yeah, if you can come at such and such time, 2 days before the canonization, like right after I arrived on the jet, yeah, you can bring it up to the office. So I did, and I met the undersecretary for the Cardinal Semeraro, and I was like, okay, I kind of here it is. But he brought me into his room, and we sat down and had a conversation for 30 minutes about this. And I mean, it
And you
was in
seemed
Italian.
excited. Was this something you seemed excited about?
The undersecretary,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he was very. I don't want to say. Well, he was very Roman, and yet at the same time, he personally he wasn't Roman. I think he's Polish. If you look at his name, Um, but he was very happy to talk about it. I mean, to welcome me. He could have just literally said, like, "No, this is controversial." Perhaps I doubt he would have heard of me, but we sat down, and my son and Beckett we have it all on recording. We're going back and forth in Italian, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this has been a long time. Like, who knows what I'm saying?" But it all worked out, and we talked about Sheen, and I really wanted to get from him. I wanted to get directly from them. What is really holding this up? Because we're being told it's this report. That's not necessary, but yet they're making it necessary. Does Rome have an issue? Like, who's holding up whom? And he said, we've never had a problem. We've never, he said, the problem has always been over in America. And even Peoria eventually admitted that in an interview with Raymond Arroyo. I always quote this from a
Yeah.
couple years ago.
Not what the problem wasn't in America. The problem was in America. Cardinal how do I say it?
Well,
The
we know,
Cardinal McCarrica. It was from, Cardinal McCarrica. Yeah, I think it
well,
had to do with McCarrick and that gang, right?
McCarrick, I think, was completely removed from all of this, to be honest. The
Okay.
intervention in the very beginning in 2019, literally just weeks before the actual mass, was an intervention from the Bishop of Rochester, Matano, who just retired. And then he, though, was really pushed into this, I think. And well, it's that I think it's pretty much documented fact from Cardinal Dolan and Cardinal Supage. And because we know that they were involved because they had the connections and all of this stuff. So basically, who else could pull the brakes on this? And so, but then this whole thing was, well, we want to be prudent. You know, you hear these stupid political statements like, Sheen is clean. We already know that they've investigated. There's nothing more thorough. Like everything that I'm asking them, they're like concurring to. It says, but out of an abundance of caution, like when you hear that line, you just know BS is coming after that.
Yeah, out of an abundance
And,
of
and you know, if
caution.
it was a political thing, I might not be as upset. But the way why this was so important is because this is about the salvation of souls. And I wrote an open letter back in October, right after I came back from Rome, and I just gave everybody a long update on this whole thing. And I said, look, I think that this is a turning point, but we need to understand why this is so important. And I've written this to Peoria. I know they've had it and they read it. They of course they don't comment on it to me. Like unfortunately, you know, hopefully that can be patched up. But I'm fighting for souls. That's why it matters to me. I don't get anything out of this. Um, and I said, I asked them, I said, how many souls weren't reached because
Yeah.
for 6 years we haven't had Blessed Sheen? When the moment that happens, the global spotlight goes on a man that'll reach probably 1 billion people through all the airwaves. And if you
Oh,
just
it's
took
it's gonna be
1%,
so big that I'm excited for your apostolate. It's gonna be so big. I hope you have a new book in the works. It's gonna be no, I mean, seriously, there's a tide in the affairs of men, and we have to,
yeah,
we have to pay attention to these things for our apostolates to evangelize, right? And I'm very excited about this. One of my hobbies is I go on eBay and I try to find first edition Fulton Sheens, and I've gotten like uh, 10 books for $30 from the 1930s, Fulton Sheen, or I buy his rosaries, his mission rosaries.
yeah,
You can buy them from the 50s that he would give out to his audience with a gift. You can get them for a couple bucks. Those days are coming to an end. Those days are coming
yeah,
to an end, you know? He will be a
yeah, they
house
are.
he will be a
But
household name again, and it'll be exciting to see Supich and
yeah,
Dolan.
it's going to be a tsunami when it comes. I think the announcement obviously is going to be big. And it could come any day. That's just to get back to your original question, is that it can come back anytime. I mean, this can be announced because basically at this point, there's 2 or 3 dates that are already being discussed, and the Diocese of Peoria needs to choose one. And um, I don't know if this will be it or not, but there was talk about in this original article that they were looking at September of 2026, which makes sense because they're going to need time to prepare for it. The other one was going to be in Peoria in a little convention center, which holds like I don't know 5,000 people. And you think of Solanus Casey, I think
You
I don't know
gotta
if
give me
he's.
tickets, brother. I know you can do it.
You know what I say? Well, if it depends on getting it from Peoria, I'll be like Sheen when John Paul II came. I'll be out of the church, you know, and I'll have to be asked to come in. I don't know. I don't want to be uncharitable. I mean, we're all on the same
No, you're
team,
probably
right?
telling the truth. I'll get you tickets. How about that? I'll sneak you.
Yeah, I know. I would absolutely love it, but you know, just whatever the Lord wills. But we're going to
I
be
wanna
there, and I hope it is. And just on that last note, um, it's we don't know the location yet, but it seems probable that it will be in St. Louis because it's very close to Peoria and they have that dome at the center of America. I think it's called now the
Yeah.
old Rams Stadium, and it holds up to 80,000 people.
There's a beautiful Catholic community there, and it's
Well,
close.
it literally, I mean, symbolically, it literally is the crossroads of America's right
Yeah, it's
there. It's
beautiful.
where John Paul II went in 1999. That's where I met my wife. I mean, for me, there's a lot of historical things there. And
John
as
Paul
far as
II,
what,
you meeting your wife, those are equal in his
well,
story. Just like My
yeah, it's
Greatest Miracle.
John
Yeah.
Paul II was our matchmaker there, and now Fulton Sheen. It's like they're passing the torch back and forth to each other. But especially, you know, I think we'll see if it is September. if I had to if I had to put my chips on the table, I would say September 20th because that would be the most fitting date. September 20th will be the anniversary for Fulton Sheen's priesthood ordination.
So to my assistant, block out the week of September 20. Literally, we're doing it
I
right
probably
now.
shouldn't be announcing this too much just because like we haven't quite made our
Don't
reservation.
worry, my
We're waiting
audience
to obviously
is
we
not
need to
that
have
big.
the
Don't worry.
the actual announcement and we're like sitting there like an Airbnb like um but I'm hoping it's soon. I have two people I know on the board, so they're the ones who will know first. One,
Okay.
as soon as I know, I'll let you know. I'll
And then I'll
send you
leak
a
it to the
text.
world. You just tell
Yeah,
me, and then I'll tell everyone. No, I'm kidding. I'm
yeah, you
kidding.
get me good. You
No,
get me
I'm not gonna tell them till
good
I book my
seats.
Airbnb. Then I'll tell them. Priorities. Can I gotta wrap the show up, and I
Yeah,
I I can't believe I've never interviewed you before. I feel like I have, but just because we talk and I've been on your show, it's wild. And I have to say, you and your wife are the best. It's like when I need someone to tell me, "I'm praying for you, you're doing good work," it's like a miracle. You guys reach out to me, and it's quite a blessing. Um, but so I'm very grateful for you, and I really can't believe I haven't ever had you on the show. We need to have you on. But I do wanna just maybe in like 5 minutes, just
mhm.
I think the 2 most influential priests in the media, mass media, in the history of mass media was Saint Maximilian Kolbe and Bishop Fulton Sheen. And the 2 of them have a lot in common actually. But I think the one thing that they had in common that's so obviously the media, but is their Mariology, their commitment to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and this idea of Mary as co-redemptrix. And now Pope Leo, who's someone I'm quite grateful for his voice for the persecuted church in the Holy Land, has said we should cease using this term. I don't know if he said it's not even theologically correct, but that it's a clumsy term that causes confusion. But I think this was something that was important both to Saint Maximilian Kolbe as a Franciscan and um, Fulton Sheen, and it's in the title of your book. So
Yeah, I mean, whoever would have thought that it's a title, or it's a work whose time has now come because I wrote it at a time where it's always been something that's been debated because it really is the last of the Marian dogmas yet to be defined. And I don't know if I have it behind me or not. I have different versions of my book, but anyway, I don't see it. But in the very beginning of my latest version of it, I have the quote from Sheen. He talks about how after the Assumption, is there one more thing that needs to be defined about Mary? And he says, yes, there is. It's Mary's the mediatrix of all graces.
wow, he
And
said this.
yeah, yeah, it's in. I wish I had it
It's in
here.
your
I
book,
guess
yeah.
I
So
must have given it away or sold it or something. But I have when I did a recent edition, I said I need to have that quote in the front. It's in the other one too somewhere, um, and Saint Maximilian Kolbe said this explicitly as well. And if you ever get his little book, I recommend it because he's one of the co-patrons of the Fulton Sheen Institute, by the way, because they're very, very similar. He, John Paul, and Colby were all, I mean, they were almost all the same. They were philosophers, theologians, and Colby was a scientist who was a master in physics, and he used everything for the
developing
salvation
rocket
of souls.
ships and satellites and
Yeah, I
in
mean,
the
this guy
20s,
was
yeah.
like totally dialed in to evangelize. I mean, he was well named. My last son, his middle name is Maximilian. Um, but yeah, this is so important because Mary's well, one, it is. Let me clarify what what's come out of Rome is a theological note. That's what's been written. Yes, you could say, yeah, I mean, Pope Leo signed off on it, even though he didn't technically sign, he allowed it to be printed. It is a theological note and nothing more. I read it, I've seen the things. Honestly, and if you get my book, I think it's depending on what version, one's longer than the other. Um, I go through this whole debate that says this has been going on since before the Second Vatican Council, the maximalists versus the minimalists of where Mary is and how to present her. Because leading up to the Second Vatican Council was the biggest dogmatic movement that ever existed. And there's still today hundreds of bishops that have signed on the petition and stuff. But anyway, it is a doctrine of our faith that Mary is the co-redemptrix. It is a doctrine of our faith that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces. It had a liturgical feast day of Mary as mediatrix of all graces, May 31st, given by Pius the or Benedict the 15th. And until the Second Vatican Council, it was celebrated on that time, thanks to Cardinal Mercier, who was Sheen's mentor, who's founded that institute in Louvain. And he was the big proponent of the dogmatic movement. So he asked for the dogma. They said, well, here's a liturgical feast. Once something enters into the liturgy, it is, other than a dogma, it is
Yeah,
of
I
the
don't
highest
feel like
authority.
Pope Leo is even denied that it's a teaching of the church, right? As he said, we need
He
to.
hasn't denied that. They're just, it's all
Yeah.
about, I don't know if they, I have to go back if they use the word, but it comes down to, is this appropriate?
Appropriate. Yeah.
Is it, or is it opportune when looking at our separated brothers and sisters, our Protestant brothers and sisters and all that stuff? They put a false ecumenism as if the church has to find ways to bend to them versus giving the truth of Mary, which then brings Protestants actually into the
And
church.
and to channel, to speak like a Gen Zer, that the boomer priests and the boomer Catholics need to learn. The evangelical church is dead. The Protestant church, it doesn't matter. Like it literally, there's no future. There is no future, especially for the mainland Protestant church is grinding to a halt, and the evangelical Christian ecclesial community is unraveling before our very eyes. If you look at those under 30 with the scandal of Gaza and the evangelical Christian Zionism, it's going to cease. We don't need to pander to people who hold to heresies anymore. I think this idea that we just have to talk to them like they're children or hide the fullness of our faith is just silly. I do understand. I mean, it's not that I don't have, I do kind of understand. It is true when you're talking to Protestants, this could be a stumbling block, but we should turn stumbling blocks into stepping stones, point to church history, point to the
Just
church father,
explain it to them.
just explain it to them.
Honestly, nobody explains it.
Yeah.
It's explained away in the sense of by avoiding it. If we actually sat down and explained it, which is what as the book does, and it takes you on a very biblical path. It's like you can't deny these things, and then of course the history of the church, but it's such a no brainer, and yet it doesn't obscure Jesus. It doesn't obscure the working of the Holy Spirit. It's like Mary the Magnificat. My soul magnifies the Lord. Why do you think Satan works so hard to cut her out of the equation? Because who is Jesus? St. Louis de Montfort puts this really clear. Jesus Christ is always the fruit of Mary and the Holy Spirit. And if our life is to have the life of Christ working in us, then we have to have an authentic love and devotion to our Blessed Mother, who then gives us an authentic love for the Holy Spirit, and then Christ lives in us. It's like it, this is addition, basic, like mathematics, or Kolbe. The principle of action and reaction. How did God come to us?
Yeah, to deny this at the end it leads to Arianism, I believe,
Well, yeah, I mean, it leads to truth. As Sheen says,
or
when
Islam.
when love of our Blessed Mother is diminished, so is love for the church. When it's because she's the mother of the church, that church is identified with Mary as our mother. So you could see why the devil focuses on her more than anything else, because like if you get that domino to fall, it's like, you know, a 50-cylinder engine, which obviously doesn't exist, but like bringing it down to 2.
Well, it's the
And he
mystery of the
knows the difference.
incarnation that the Trinity partnered with this woman in this such an intimate way. Um, that's the mystery of mysteries. And once you are embarrassed of that or step away from that or cease to talk about that, why not? I think it is the most beautiful mystery of our faith.
And it's not hard to understand. The image that makes it easier than anything is anything that we can relate to. Using theological terms like, okay, co-redemptrix might be more challenging for people. I actually describe co-redemptrix as Mary's mediatrix. But let's just say those terms. Like, how do we understand that? Mary's the new Eve. And if you understand Eve, the first Eve, that her involvement and what was passed down to all of humanity came down to her sin. Adam, of course, sinned. He's the head, so he passed it down. But all of that comes through the children of Eve. And Eve related to Adam as both spouse and then mother of the children. Mary has always, since the earliest days of the church, has been seen as the new Eve. And so when you see it that way, everything that we receive, like Eve was passed on in our human nature, and then of course passed on original sin from Adam comes to us. So what's going to be passed on from the new Adam is passed down through a new mother. So every single grace comes from the new Adam, but it comes to us through her, and she molds us as she molded the incarnation. It's like it's so easy. That's why Sheen says our life is already lived. It's completely patterned after Christ. Like if you understand Christ, you understand the church because the church is the mystical extension of Christ. There it is. So just look at Eve, then there's the new Eve. Oh,
Dr. Howard, I want to talk to you about this for hours, but
sorry. Keep
Vulnerable
going
People
on.
Project work is barreling in on me, and I'm just so glad I got to have this time to interview you today. Honestly, I want to have you on again in the next coming weeks, and
I'd
maybe
love
even
to.
talk to you
Yeah.
about doing a series on Fulton Sheen. We can think out a thoughtful
Yeah,
series to
absolutely.
communicate with our audience because Fulton Sheen is at the heart of this apostolate, and that's why I think that you and your wife get me in our organization more than anyone. Because
Yeah, we love your organization. Just to interject, we're kind of like missionaries. We make it as God provides and all that. But I will say this: the one organization that we support, it is the Vulnerable People Project. I get your message. I get them all the time, and we can't always necessarily support every single thing that comes out. But when I read something through, and it's like, for $24.95 or whatever, you can get wood for a week. But if you do 100, you do this, and they can do like 10 families for a month for $200. I'm like, it's like you're like the people walking by the Good Samaritan, and Sheen talked about that. They found something more important to put their attention to because they know if they looked at him and stopped, they'd have to acknowledge him, and seeing him gives responsibility. So whenever I see your messages, it's always like a caveat emptor. I'm just like, man, I wish I was a freaking millionaire because, but I'm like, I don't, I'm looking at things. It doesn't matter. Boom. $200 goes to this. And it's like, but it's real. Like I know all of that goes to these people in Gaza. Most of the time it's in Gaza. And there's just nothing more beautiful than to be able to, and I think necessary. It tests a lot of things. Like if you're like, well, I don't have like as much as I want, or I don't, there's always reasons, but it's like, do I really believe God's going to provide? For me, if I do things that stretch
yeah.
me. It's like, of course, he will. So,
We at VPP, my staff is on the other side of the camera, and they'll tell you like, I'll often greenlight things we don't have the money for, and they go, "Are you serious?" Like I'll order $100,000 in tents to go into Gaza, and I'll say, "Well, let's get to work." And God always steps up, and for me, it is just quite a privilege to be a part of this, and that our donors trust us because, we often people say, "I don't believe that you're actually getting this into there or getting those people out of there," and we do a pretty good job of documenting everything that we can that doesn't put people in jeopardy, and yet they can see the video and still say, "It's really hard to believe that you're able to do this," and so, I always say God does it, and we just point and go, "Look what we did," but the reality is God opens up these doors for us to serve these vulnerable communities, and we draw on my apostle was founded on the writings and thinking of Maximilian Kolbe and Fulton Sheen, and so for you to believe in us, it means the world to me.
yeah, well, they complement each other. Like Sheen focuses on souls at the end of the day, but Christ is always, we find him especially in the poor and in the vulnerable. And we're working to stop the these evils from happening in what we do with our movement. I wish we could talk about the daily holy hour, but I will just say this to everybody who's watching: the one thing Sheen always left his people with, especially in time of war, and you can go to our website and watch this. I put together an amazing clip. It's like 10 minutes long of things of Sheen. If you listen to this and you don't start making a holy hour every day, even if you can't make it at church, you make it at home. I don't know. Check your
All right,
heart.
here's
But
what we're gonna do, brother. My producer's gonna message you. We're gonna do a show on the holy hour, maybe next week if we can, because
yeah,
let's start I do holy hours like everything I do in my life. I start out with a bang and I go out with a whimper. I'm gonna do a holy hour today for the rest of my life. And it's like 2 weeks this is so easy. And then, wah, wah, so I'm always recommitting,
You can do it
recommitting.
anywhere. When you do that, it
Yeah.
changes. Because like I started traveling a lot at certain times, and I make them on the plane. I make them in certain places.
Good.
I put on noise canceling headphones and 60 minutes, and it's intentional. I offer it in combat against all the evil, all the things that Sheen says. Anyway, I always say, look, don't listen to me rant on it because I'm imperfect. And this is the one thing that I left with from my retreat that I listened to that first time in Dallas was this. I couldn't say no. He's gonna ask you to account for this. And not only that, this is the one thing that will absolutely change everything in the world. And Sheen says it himself. And he says, in a time of war, it is the one thing, not only Catholics, he says Protestants and Jews should be making it. So we'll talk about that. But he says, what are we doing as
Yeah.
Catholics that's any different now in a time of war than we did in false peace? He says, this
Mm,
is the one thing you can do. I was like,
I'm in.
there you go. All
I'm
right.
in, Dr. Howard. We're going to show on this. But with that, thank you very much. I got to land the plane. To the audience, go in the show notes, order Dr. Howard's book, The Woman, and it's a
Yeah,
long
get the
title.
Kindle version.
No, I couldn't find it. I reordered it today because I gave mine away. There's a Kindle version?
Yeah, and I actually find that that's probably better because the physical ones get out too fast. So I always say get the Kindle one. You can put it on any of your electronic devices, and that's on our website. And we're actually just transferring our website, so I hope that there's that link still there,
What's
but
the
it'll be up
website?
within
We'll put it in the
24
show
hours
notes
if it's
as well.
not.
Can you say the website?
Yeah, fultonsheeninstitute.com.
This is, by the way, now is the time to get on their list because you want to know first, before everyone else, where the beatification is taking place so you can get your hotel room for less than $1,000. I think that's something you need to do. Dr. Howard, thank you
Yeah,
very much. I'm really grateful for you and your family's apostolate. And your apostolate really is the fruit of your beautiful family. Thank you very much. Okay,
thank
guys.
you. Yep,
Pardon me,
thank you,
brother.
Jason.
Thank you,
I
brother.
was gonna say thank you, Jason, and if I can for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, you're in Texas. We got an awesome Fulton Sheen retreat in Dallas at the end of April, 27th of April to May 1st in Dallas, Texas. It's a Fulton Sheen retreat. I guarantee you it's going to be everything that changed my life and a friend of my life who guarded it. He's named his kid Fulton after it.
I
All
want
this
to do
stuff
it.
is
I'm
there.
going to be in Honolulu premiering one of my new movies on
That's all
those
right. But
days.
your
Ah,
listeners, they can join us there. This is the year of Sheen. The spotlight is on him. So come to that. And then also go to our YouTube channel, Fulton Sheen, at Fulton Sheen Institute, because starting probably by the time this is already going or recorded or played, we're having the Sheen Spotlight, where we're going to be going for about 10 minutes very frequently through aspects of his life, spotlighting why Sheen, why now, and all the things that are relevant about him is going to be awesome. So just go there, check it out, and subscribe. That would mean everything.
done deal. We're all doing it.
Thanks, brother.
We're all doing it, right, guys? All right. Thank you, Dr. Howard. All right. I got VPP business waiting on the other side of this camera. And, the world is unraveling. And this episode, as always, as all of our episodes, is being brought to you. By the way, we used to have sponsors, My Pillow, who else? So we had a lot of sponsors. Epoch Prime, but we found that so many folks were donating to VPP. I said, we don't need other sponsors. What we really need is to just focus on the work of the Vulnerable People Project. And what do? We stand with the most vulnerable people in the world in the most challenging places and times when the world has walked away. Just like when Bishop Fulton Sheen flinched at the hand of a leper. I often flinch at the tasks that are presented before us at VPP. I'm often afraid. I don't want to go to these places. I know there'll be consequences for advocating for this people or that people, and I flinch. But by God's grace, we stay committed and we stand with these people. And what is really the mission of our apostolate? It is to teach the truth of our purpose. We are created to know and love God and to love our neighbors. And so I wanted to take a radical way to live my life and to invite people to partner with us to do this. And there is no better way than to standing with the people the world has forgotten to show the world the love of Christ. And by the way, Fulton Sheen wrote about this in his book, The Mystical Body of Christ. He wrote about this book on missions in the world crisis. And it was my inspiration, inspired by the life of Maximilian Kolbe and the writing of Fulton Sheen, that led to the Vulnerable People Project. And if you want to be a part of what we do, and that's also why I make movies. And by the way, Maximilian Kolbe also loved the creative arts. So all of this is derivative of the example of these two great saints. Go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com, look at what we do. And if it's something you want to be a part of, click and just make a small donation. Make the very best donation you can. And if it's $5, but now you're Colossians 2:22, you're knit together in love with vulnerable communities around the world. And that's what we do. All right, guys, until next time. I can't believe I waited this long to have Dr. Howard on. Shame on me. Until next time, it's been the Jason Jones Show. Aloha.